I thought it might be worth running through some of the problems facing Britain's rural communities at the moment. We're currently in the agricultural transition, where the subsidies for food production put in place after the Second World War and maintained through the European Union's Common Agricultural Policy are being removed. And under the current Labour government, they're being scaled back much faster than was agreed and have been capped at £7,200. Government ministers keep lying and saying that we currently have the largest ever budget for sustainable agriculture and nature's recovery, but the agricultural budget has been frozen, shrinking in real terms since 2014. And despite all the boasts of generosity from the government, DEFRA hasn't even been spending all the money available to it. Over the last 3 years, agriculture has not received £358 million worth of money. This is partly because they've frozen capital grant payments for environmental projects. And they've also been handing out money for things we've already done late, which causes cash flow problems. The sustainable farming incentive schemes that are replacing the old subsidies disproportionately benefit large landowners over working farmers. The landscape recovery schemes in particular are taxpayers' money only available for very large landowners. And if farmers are to actually do stuff through these sustainable farming incentive schemes, the money often disappears in cost. For example, we can get £732 per tonne for winter bird food, but it costs £600 a tonne. Plus labour, admin costs, fuel, machinery, insurance. There's nothing left for profit or investment. And everybody knows about the inheritance tax. This is a tax on the value of the land, the assets that our businesses need to function and to employ people and to produce food would be worth if we were to sell it, which we haven't done because we're still working farmers. This tax is inherently demanding money that we don't have. According to DEFRA's figures, return on capital employed in agriculture is 0.5% a year, whereas a 20% tax spread over 10 years above the threshold is about 2% a year. This tax is 4 times farm incomes. We cannot afford to pay it. And I think the real kick in the teeth is that the government is trying to change compulsory purchase so they can force us off our land at the current use value, not the market value that we have to pay tax on. The government is sending £536 million abroad to support agricultural projects, which is fine, but it's exactly the sort of stuff they're trying to stop us doing. And the Treasury thinks that the inheritance tax breaking up agricultural businesses in Britain is going to raise about £520 million by the end of the decade. So Britain is funding foreign agriculture at the expense of its own. The government has also lied to the NFU and the CLA, our industry representative bodies, and explicitly said they wouldn't alter the inheritance tax. There was the whole thing when the Conservatives announced money to cover flood damage to farms and then just didn't release the funds. Farmgate commodity prices haven't risen with inflation, so on a really basic level, our incomes can't cover our increasing costs. The government seem to recognise this because they are telling us to diversify away from food production into other businesses so that we can support food production privately as an act of charity. Steve Reed has explicitly said that he wants an agricultural sector where farm businesses can diversify their income to make a fair profit and remain viable. Civil servants have gone on record saying that we should produce crisps or gin instead of the commodities that we all need to survive. The Red Tractor Assured scheme, which looks at food standards, tried to add a Greener Farms commitment module, which looked like they were going to make farmers do environmental things for no financial reward whatsoever. Although they did back down on that point, the Independent Farm Assurance Review has called for a fundamental reset of the system to rebuild confidence amongst farmers. Supermarkets and processing companies crush us on price. Farmers famously see very little profit from the sales of bread, as little as 0.09 pence profit for a £1.14 loaf of bread. And the risk required for that return is over 9 pence of expenditure. The government is after a complete ban on the use of bee-killing pesticides, but the difficulty is when we can't use these products and our crops fail, but we're expected to compete with imports from countries where farmers can use those products. We need a level playing field by demanding imported food meets domestic regulations. The Conservative government did trade deals that allow access to our markets for Australian beef that has economies of scale and uses products we can't. We cannot compete with this. They're talking about banning muck spreading, which is something necessary for agriculture. They're putting a carbon tax on fertiliser, which on a very basic level I get, but also we need fertiliser to survive. They're also removing exemptions that we used to get for recycling. As with all things, these exemptions were put in place for a reason. Farm incomes are low and recycling is a good thing, so we need help to be able to do it. This will be another cost. In a similar vein, they're also taxing double cab pickups and increasing the cost of firearms licences. These might seem like luxury items to some people, but they are necessary for certain business models, so these are additional costs. Thankfully, Steve Reed has recognised our concerns. They have announced that the government have a cast-iron commitment to food production, and what this means is, for the first time ever, the government will monitor food currently brought in the public sector and where it is brought from. And they care about food production so much that they're giving over top-rate agricultural land for solar panels, some of which are for Labour donors. And Steve Reed has announced that the government will be taking agricultural land out of production. Our livelihoods are explicitly being attacked by the government, all while there are no targets for food production in the same way there are targets for biodiversity or green energy or house building. The government have clearly decided that our communities must give way. And Steve Reed, as the minister responsible for our industry, has been incredibly rude to us. When we all came to Westminster in November, he said to a parliamentary select committee that the reason we were all outside is because we are too stupid to understand the maths and because we're all very conservative and are happily attacking the Labour Party.
Them probably happily are wrong.
And when Steve Reed was presented with a case of a farmer who had taken his own life to save his family the stress of having to deal with the inheritance tax, the minister declared that it was a mental health issue and therefore none of his responsibility.
What does the Secretary of State say to that grieving family?
Secretary of State.
I extend my heartfelt sympathies to that family, but I think it is irresponsible in the extreme to seek to weaponise a personal tragedy of that kind in this way. Where there is mental ill health, then there needs to be support for that, and this government is investing in it.
And all this is while 30% of farms made no money or less in the 2023 to 24 financial year. This is unsustainable, and it matters because 17% of people in this country struggle to afford food already, which is a national embarrassment. We are seeing malnutrition in cities, and we, the farmers who are prepared to keep working under the extreme pressures created by the mismanagement of successive governments, are a dwindling minority. We have particular cultural attributes that allow us to keep producing food at a loss over long periods of time. That is the benefit of small family farms. We can keep food prices low for the urban working class by not taking a wage. But the people who are prepared to do that, the people who fed Britain during the war, are running out. Help us help you. And that is why we're here today. We know our industry, we know our land, and we know what's in the national interest. It is imperative for the security of this nation and for the environment that we save British farming.